on the utility side. About 2 or 3 years ago, we were working with a company called, it was a streaming company, streaming sports online, and they wanted to use blockchain and basically create a token that would be like a fan token, kind of like Chili's, right? And that company not only was able to create utility around it, but they were able to have Stats, which is one of the largest companies in the US that does all the statistics for all the games, to actually use their coin to pay for for people, for other companies to pay for their statistics. And then they went to something called FanWide, which we introduced them to in Seattle, that organizes these game watching excursions for people who are expats and they're rooting for a team but they don't live in the same city, so they go to a bar and restaurant and watch the game and get excited about it. They were actually using that same fan chain at that time to buy burgers and beer and everything else. This was 2 or 3 years ago. So I believe that once Mark Cuban said you can buy Maverick stuff with a Doge, that's what started all these bars in Texas to accept it, and now all these other cities that Adrian's pointing to. So it's not going away.
Yeah, so it's tricky behind the scenes, So the last place I worked before Kadelsky is called Sweetbridge, and they were sort of building a auditing blockchain that used dual token economies, and like you had to opt into the ecosystem and live in the world of tokens for it to work. It was tricky because in the world we're in today, even with Doge, I bet very small percentage of these companies aren't immediately converting it to fiat because of the necessity to pay for that thing you just bought with fiat. Like there's not a full supply chain using Doge, so you can't keep it in there unless you believe in the speculation. And if it goes down, you'll find a way to write it off, or you'll call it a marketing expense. Right? In the case of Mark Cuban, if Doge goes away, he writes it off as a marketing expense because he's the chief spokesperson. In the case of all these businesses that accept it, whatever processor they use immediately converts it to dollars when it hits, and they have no exchange rate fee. In the case of, we'll say the dating ecosystem, maybe you buy the VIP membership with tokens and you leave it in the system because you want to send more messages, and so now you have a utility for it. But there's no huge supply chain utility across buy, sell, keep buying, keep selling, because that full circle isn't there yet. So this will be another one. When it starts going down, people are going to be like, whoa, I can't accept this anymore. The exchange rate is too great. But it's great now because it's going up. And if I forget the exchange rate, at least it went up again and I made an extra buck tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea that people should and want to use cryptocurrencies for payments is just a misguided idea in the first place. So most of the time you're going to create a taxable event, you have to establish the cost basis for that particular token. So that's already a non-starter at that point in time, just from an administrative perspective. The larger point, however, is that the remaining function of fiat is simply that of unit of account or of your language of value. That's why you see a translation into the US dollar when you look at your wallet for any asset, right? So the larger point here then is if and when and where we have CBDCs or any unit of account that is actually a digital bearer instrument, we're still waiting for that. At that point in time, M1 at stasis has no reason to exist. So what I mean by that, look at your demand deposit account, what you guys call your cash account or your checking account. So you only keep as much money in there as you expect to spend in a reasonable time frame. You typically don't keep $1 million or so in there. So the point is, because it's always going to go down in purchasing power. So everybody is doing what's being built manually right now on a daily basis, as in I'm going to adjust all my accounts so that I don't lose purchasing power. However, you can automate this. We already did. So you don't actually have to have anything inflationary if until someone on the other end is asking for this particular payment instrument, which will become less and less because, again, M1 at stasis shouldn't even exist and won't exist. And two of the research teams around the world on CBDC actually came to the same conclusion that we did 2 years ago, that at that point in time, most commercial banks don't have a reason to exist because 30% of their revenue is coming from payments. Anyway, I'm going to stop myself again.
No, you're right. Yeah, no, this is absolutely right. And I think a couple of Infioms ago, there was one of the guests was talking about, the idea that you spend Bitcoin means you're putting sell pressure on the market, and the value goes down if everybody starts selling Bitcoin to buy groceries every time. So why would you do that? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, it makes sense in El Salvador, for example. It doesn't make sense if you're in the United States,
Okay,
right? Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's not
But,
how the NIT
everyday
works.
transactional purposes,
Yes,
just
exactly.
in theory doesn't.
Exactly.
Well, but
But
even in emerging markets, like it doesn't really matter because like the whole point is like anybody's gonna buy Dogecoin cannot just like buy it directly. They're gonna like essentially if you're spending Dogecoin, it's because you have it. You're not gonna go buy Dogecoin to go then do your grocery shopping, whether you're in the U.S. or you're in Salvador. So essentially, the only people spending Dogecoin are the hodlers. So as Scott mentioned, yeah, it just brings down pressure on the price.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
but
I was thinking,
you
I
have
was
to
thinking
think
about this
about
earn revenue thing here.
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, the people who are making money on this DeFi are the ones who already were in the market, like you just said. But the second piece of that is if you're a fiat, I guess a fiat onboard, a crypto onboard thing, MoonPay, all these Simplex. If you have a huge cash treasury right now and you're willing to convert to any magic internet money you want to convert to, people will give you that $1.95 to $12.95 fee so they can use their MasterCard. If you have figured that out, like that is the biggest money making opportunity of the century right now with this market going crazy, because everybody will convert with their credit card and then deal with MasterCard later.
So you're advocating getting as many of these credit cards as possible at the moment?
Well, what I would say is if you are a nefarious human being, the way to game the system is to think about the fact that you're going to file bankruptcy anyway. Get yourself approved for a $100,000 credit line with Chase, with American Express, pick them all. Onboard all of that into crypto somewhere through whatever gateway will take it, and then just declare bankruptcy. Your entire net worth is not able to be liquidated. The bankruptcy court can't take it. You've essentially gamed the system, and whoever onboarded you made a ton of money on that conversion fee.
Okay, so we're definitely not advocating that. But
we're not advocating that. We're saying that
no,
makes
but
it horrible.
my job is to stop that from happening.
Yeah, totally.
And so I have to think like this.
So Voyager and Crypto.com, all on board with debit cards or bank wires. Several others will do credit cards. I mean, I always tell everybody, like I said, Vegas money. If you're going to spend the money, make sure it's money you don't need and that you just have lying around. Literally go scour the couch, whatever you find, buy crypto with that. Like that's for new people. But you're right, there are nefarious people out there that do that. But with blockchain, unless you're talking about putting it into a Tumble wallet or Monero or some other privacy coin, they're going to be able to trace that. And then you just have to have it in some kind of a hardware wallet where they can't actually take it back. Otherwise, they can usually figure out a way to take it back.
I'd like to know how you guys figured out how to get exchanges to even take credit cards, because my experience thus far is that these credit card issuers won't allow the withdrawal of loans essentially to get crypto.
In general, the main banks, and this started like a long time ago. I think it was like probably already 4 years ago in 2016, around that area. Around the time was when Bank of America, Citibank, and all the main banks started not allowing people to use credit cards for Coinbase. But for a long time, and I don't know if this is still the case, a lot of the smaller regional banks. So if you think about things like, I don't know, PNC or KeyBank, I don't know, Harris Bank, all those smaller ones, they were still allowing it. I don't know. I'm guessing they hadn't like seen big losses, but that's usually where like the smaller banks play in. So that's an option if it's still open. I don't know if anybody has tried it yet.
Yeah, this is again tricky. There's permutations that work everywhere. I'll just leave it like that. And like I said, we're not advocating this, but this is a really interesting conflict between, especially in the US, local state rule. Your local credit union can issue you a credit card that can transact in cryptocurrency with a locally licensed business up to a certain dollar amount. because that fits within the fiduciary sandbox rules that the local place created, which is currently illegal in the state, but not the city, but maybe federally, and definitely not internationally. And this goes back, I think, Christian, to a very early point, is you almost have to stop enforcing rules, and the system has to sort of deal with it one hop at a time as it gets to the person wherever they are.
Well, there's two aspects to that. So, for one, we delegated the power to create money to the state, and they deputized commercial banks to create money for the most part, right? And so the point here being is that money is a public good. So what all of these entities actually doing, in my mind, is unconstitutional. So there is from the perspective of money is speech, as in quota speech, because what is more an expression of self than how you allocate your capital, and then specifically using a public good to do so. That's basically telling you can't use this particular road because you have a particular color car. That makes utterly no sense. And I think we're just going to prove this to be the correct way of doing it simply through technology.
I just saw a presentation today based on MetaMask uptake in Nigeria and Brazil. And the Nigeria case was quite interesting because of all the unbanked people there that have adopted cryptocurrency and are doing it to circumvent the government. And now I think the Nigerian government has come out with some regulations about cryptocurrency. There was one example of a guy who was withdrawing money from an ATM machine, and the police were there, and they literally held him up, stuck, took his money, and because it's government corruption. And
Yes.
so I think what we're starting to see now is this uptake in economically developing countries that are uptaking it for very different reasons than we're seeing in the more economically developing areas. When you start talking about avoiding government corruption, it kind of reminds me of avoiding just printing cash.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to look back in history. So we actually did this analysis throughout history for the last couple of hundred years. Whenever a national currency failed to perform its function as unit of account, at that point in time, people would go to the secondary language of value, which usually was the printed US dollar. That's why there's 14 other countries right now that use the US dollars. But it's actually the US dollar in printed form. When they raided Saddam Hussein's palace, they found, I think, $400 or $600 million in cash in that building. So the point there being is that this is actually the main form of money laundering, and that's widely known. B is also the most profitable export product of the United States, because most of that cash actually exists outside of the United States. And then one thing to realize is money is a network technology. It strives of its network effects. So that's why my expectation is that eventually all other unit of accounts, unless we're doing it entirely wrong and insulate ourselves, will default into the US dollar, because it's already the world's reserve currency. And at that point in time, it's kind of game over for all other countries to be able to inflate their own currency, unless we create ourselves an island here. Because at the end of the day, if you look at this from like a network perspective, take the example of telecom. What do we do in telecom? What did we do with voice over IP? Voice over IP used to be illegal in Mexico for 10 years. People still used it, obviously, because they didn't want to be metered per minute. Still, we are doing this right now with money. There's no technical reason for that. So people will eventually gravitate towards that. The only risk that we have is that we create these islands where people have to, what I call, least cost around. So if one country is issuing a CBDC, i.e. China, that has the main purpose of surveillance, people will least cost around, because any surveillance, any friction will be least costed around. So the friction could be time delays, it could be fees, or it could be simply observational, right? So it's technology at the end of the day.
Would you think that cryptocurrencies then will become some other form of security, like equity or something? It will morph into something else?
Yeah, I don't like to use the term because it's not nuanced enough, right? So the term cryptocurrency is utterly useless in my mind, and always has been. The point there being is, when you do a Visa transaction, it's encrypted, right? And so I also don't like to use the term blockchain technology, because blockchain technology predates the Bitcoin white paper by a decade. Blockchain is something different that combines certain elements. And so I've been saying for some time, mostly to be provocative, the number of cryptocurrencies we need is somewhere between 0 and 1. So, and here the point being is what I said earlier, all of these systems, all systems of value transfer, are already key lock systems where you are the key, you by yourself. So the asset is only relevant in terms of how and if and where you can actually control it. This is about control, because there's this perception of ownership that you actually need to be able to differentiate, right? You don't own anything per se, right? That you don't actually control.
I think what we're going to see here, I'm going to take a little curve for a second, is we've had fairly stable economic times over the last few years. But if we begin to see inflationary pressures, and I don't think there's any doubt we're going to, the just question is what that's going to look like. It'll be really interesting to see how cryptocurrencies track against inflationary pressures in the West, in the economically developing countries, versus the non-economically developing countries. Um, I think inflation is going to be a trigger point that's going to really make a determination about uptake in the economically developed regions of the world.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about inflation, you always have to break it down. It makes no sense to talk about money or inflation in general terms. Inflation can be good or bad for you, depending on what side of the ledger you sit, so to speak, right? And for the most part, inflation is good for the United States because we can export our debt. However, it's really bad from the perspective of that what we're actually doing is inflating asset prices, right? So mostly we have been inflating the housing market, which has been inflating 10.5% over the last 10 years. Which priced out a lot of people, on average 0.5% to 1% of the population, right? But it's the inflation of the asset. That's the starting point, because it's the creation of new money for a non-productive thing, for something like a house that already existed. So that's what inflation is. So and then inflating things like cost of education and so forth. So to talk like the Federal Reserve, to talk about inflation in general terms, this is just like a vacuous discussion, right? It makes no sense on an individual level whatsoever.
Yeah, I should have been a little more specific. I'm more interested in when companies need to borrow and what those borrowing rates are going to look like for capital expansion. And as these rates go up, there's going to be a pass through to the consumer. I mean, regardless who the consumer is, it's totally unimportant. But there will be this pass through that will occur. It's unavoidable. It's going to pass through as the equity market reflects that, right? Because the equities will reflect inflationary pressures against businesses. That will be, for me, what's going to be the trigger for how the cryptocurrency market is going to respond. And just for me, it's my opinion, but I think it's going to track. I think that's what we're going to see, actually. It's counterintuitive, but I think that's what we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, it's way nuanced. It's a discussion that we have internally here with 10 people a couple of times a week. So you really need to break this down into the different markets and within the different markets into the different asset classes. I mean, we'll see, I think, a lot more moving to synthetics and being basically used to back up virtual assets at the end of the day, right? So it's Gresham's law at work right now, rapidly.
So the question that I still have, after this very extensive discussion on the payments and, kind of the future of that, there are these frequent user miles and points that everybody has been used to having on all sorts of products they purchase. And I would say that cryptocurrencies somewhat behave that way. But in addition to that, you have these DAOs and very kind of cult-like communities that are making money off of each of the projects. And so you have this passion attached to the value of that frequent user mile, if you like, or a frequent point. And so that converts into some of the uptake we're seeing in these altcoins, because everybody is kind of vested inside their own DAO system. So I don't see that going away.
but that's mostly an MMOPG, Mariana. So again, it's not attached to real world economic activity for the most part. Take the Dogecoin example, right? So it's an insulated little space, and it's only people that are actually familiar with the system.
But they still create value with it. Like if you think of, Uber or Lyft or Airbnb, but with
Yeah.
currency.
So when you talk about value, you have to differentiate. So value is half belief, half utility, right? So you have to then assign a certain percentage of how much is a utility and how much is a belief system. So if it comes down to Dogecoin, it's 100% belief system. There's like a diminishing utility to it. There's probably nothing that you can't be doing better with your dollar, right?
Yes, and I mean you can do things with a dollar, but I think with Doge you also have this unique way of identifying with something that you're a part of that
Yeah,
you can't really, have dollar do for you.
sure. That's part of the belief system that I mentioned. But again, as I'm a technologist, so I look at this from the technology angle. You can't ignore the belief system, obviously, but that's mostly a matter of adoption, right?
Absolutely. And I think I'm looking at more from biz dev and marketing perspective. And I feel that we never really valued that in developing businesses in the past. But with these consensus economies, you have to value that. There is an intrinsic value here that may not be, transferred directly into a payment structure, but I think it's driving the underlying economies.
So Mariana, do you have any of your funding partners want to invest in companies in Dogecoin?
I think that I would say that I was really thinking of it as a joke up till Mark Cuban started using it to pay for things, for Mavericks. And then I realized, okay, other people are going to use this to do the same thing. And then when, Novogratz started covering it as research, I have to kind of take it a little more seriously, I think, than we are at the moment. So I'm taking it more seriously.
Yeah, I hope that there's not a catastrophic end. The player base is probably spread out enough, but I think back to the Franklin Mint, if people know who that is. Everybody wanted the limited edition gold eagle plate and was willing to pay 5 easy installments of $59.95, and now you can find those at Goodwill every week, because they were a thing for a while and now they're not a thing anymore. So in 3 years, let's see if this is a thing, because remember this, Doge is 6 years old, maybe 7, and it was forgotten about. The guy sold all his tokens like it's abandoned.
But if what Christian said last week, that NFTs are going to be used in supply chain management, and this is something near and dear to your heart, Scott. I think that the whole space may be still interesting for other brands that are not cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This Doge.
Jason, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Scott. No, go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
No, I was going off on a tangent.
Yeah, this Doge thing, I can't, in a way, it's, it's one of these things where those of us who are purists, kind of look at it and smirk. The problem is an incredibly powerful entertainment venue, and we're going to see, right, Saturday Night Live with. So you're going to see a whole new class of entertainment that's going to start to pop up around these things, and I have to take it more serious too.
I
Yeah.
Yeah,
can't.
maybe I have my entertainment hat on. That's the problem.
I cannot wait to see what Saturday Night Live does with it after their, literally their little, Santa elf. What are NFTs? I just can't even wait to see what they do with Doge. I think it's going to be hilarious.
Absolutely.
Right. And I told everybody, I'm like, look, Elon's going on. They're going to do something funny with Doge, which means that mainstream consumers are going to actually go, what the heck is Doge? And then our Doge rooms are going to blow up because, I mean, we literally did 10 days, 24 hours a day straight. And then we've done several since then. But 10 days, 24 hours straight with over 100,000 people with the average listening time of 1,000 minutes. That's insane on ClubHouse.
That's
Those stats
insane.
were insane.
Wow.
I mean, obviously, to explain will Dogecoin reach $1, we had to do a lot of basics for what is blockchain, what is cryptocurrency, what is it used for, what are smart contracts. So we covered the entire spectrum, but people stayed for 1,000 minutes.
Yeah. Are you interested in doing a session sometimes just on domain NFTs?
Yes, and I noticed that you have the .NFT, and you and I are going to be having a conversation later because
Yeah.
I've been digitally stalking you. I think I have a little crush. You're
Yeah.
like seriously smart, so there's a lot we can do.
Yeah.
Can I play too?
I bought that before the network launched.
Yes, and yes, Scott, you can too. I literally just tweeted you that you rock because your DMs aren't
Yeah,
open.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I have to
DMs
protect myself from
platform
crypto
here
weirdos.
on Clubhouse. So you gotta give people a way to reach out and touch you.
You got to put your bio on there. Well, I want to thank everyone. I realize everyone's time is extremely valuable, and we try to keep these to an hour because it's sort of a lunch hour every Wednesday. We have a virtual Infiom Salon next week, which is from 12:30 to 1:30. It's a Zoom, and I was told by some of the presenters they like to have the breakout rooms in Zoom. So we will finish that at 1:30 and jump on to this Clubhouse discussion again next Wednesday. Everybody's invited. Please join us again as speakers. I want to thank you for great comments, and I learn a lot every week, and I appreciate all of you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
See you later.
everybody.
Thanks.